All right, perfect. Like Thomas mentioned, I'm a reporter at The Information, where I primarily cover AI. And I'll let my panelists introduce themselves in a moment. But just to give some framing here, like the name of this panel suggests, we're really talking about the life cycle of research ideas right now. Where are the best ideas coming from? Where are established companies vulnerable to disruption from new research ideas and everything that has to happen in between? So those are some of the topics that we hope to get into. So if we could go down the line and do some introductions, tell us who you are and what you're working on.
Hi, my name's Bloxwich. I work for Google DeepMind. I lead our responsible development and innovation team, and that's a team that looks across how we actually operationalize and apply ethics on a day-to-day basis.
Hi, my name is Mahashweta. I'm a senior director at Visa. We are based in Foster City. I lead the foundational AI team at Visa. We are working on designing and developing research breakthroughs with the intent to solve challenging problems in the payments industry. I have been associated with AI my whole life. I started as a student. I finished my master's in data science, machine learning way back in 2010 in Ohio State University. And then I did my PhD in computer science from University of Texas. Thank you for inviting me to the panel.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rama, Akkiraju. I'm a VP of Enterprise AI at NVIDIA. My mission is to transform NVIDIA itself to be the most forward-looking AI company where all of its business processes, IT operations, and everything are using the latest greatest AI and fully optimized. So it's quite an exciting mission. Prior to joining NVIDIA 2 years ago, I was at IBM. I was an IBM fellow and VP and CTO for AI Ops.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Goldmann. I'm the Chief Ethical and Humane Use Officer at Salesforce, which means that I'm responsible for making sure that the AI that we ship is trustworthy. I'm super excited about this. So let's dive in.
That sounds great. I'm really excited about it too. I have some questions prepared, and then I might ask specific follow-ups to some people on the panel, but you should also feel free to follow up on statements that your fellow panelists make. So my first question is kind of a two-part question. I wonder, what is an idea or research area that you have your eye on that you think is small now, but could be really big in the future, in the next couple of years? And the second part is, why is it not big yet? What's blocking it? What's standing in its way?
It's a really interesting question. I think for me, one of the things I've been thinking about quite a lot is, as we're starting to think about the world of agents and as we're starting to think about the world of LLMs starting to evolve, it's more about how does AI really sort of manifest in the physical world, right? So it's about the spatial awareness. And even from that spatial awareness, then how do we sort of start to think about how AI might be embodied? And so I think that's a really, really interesting space for us. And in about a year's time, I think that's going to be really important. I think the reason why at the moment it may not be is because really that information isn't there. And we're actually starting to see, like, on the previous panels, there's been this sort of discussion around how data is so important. I think we're only just starting to gather some of that data, and that will actually sort of help us as we think about, moving into that sort of embodiment space.
I can go next. There are a few. I think I'll just mention one and leave it for the rest of the panelists to talk about. I think the one I think is going to go big in the next few years is federated learning. So today the whole focus is on training. These people keep training, but I think we have also started realizing that there is a synergy to have an exchange of data. Like if Google and Apple talk to each other, the data that exchange, the quality of services available to people will be significantly superior, but data doesn't leave people's data center. So even I think federated learning will provide us the opportunity to train models without having to put all data in a centralized repository. So I think it's going to be big. And if you ask me the reason why it's still not big, a couple of reasons. First, there are some regulations that we need to adhere to that's coming directly from the federal government. I believe the researchers working on federated learning are still trying to figure out the do's and don'ts and what is allowed and what is not allowed from the government and the EU and the whole world perspective. And B, I think the resources are also dedicated to training AI models. People haven't started taking topics like federated learning seriously. We just need to diversify the efforts to other places.
I think I can think of two agents. Of course, they're not so obscure anymore. They're very much in the air, but the actual value hasn't yet been realized. We are just at the cusp of it. So what do we mean by agents? We are really talking about software systems that are able to do complex tasks and are able to do it by themselves, plan for complex problem decomposition and all of that themselves and do it. And that really will take us from making a simple LLM call to really solving problems for the enterprise. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about making one LLM call, it's about solving the problem, which involves workflow automation, task automation, orchestrating all of these things and really planning so that people don't have to, in a static way, build out all of these systems. So agents can go a long way. I mean, agents have been there in the field of computer science for quite some time, but LLMs really give them, take them to the next level. So there we'll see a lot of action in the space of agents with LLMs in the coming few months to days, and that's the time period we're talking about in this Gen AI era, right? The second thing I would say is, which has been going on for quite some time, neurosymbolic AI. That it's the current world of LLMs and natural language progression has been all about really understanding natural language, but learning with a lot of data, brute force data. And so how they really reason is not something that's well understood. So this is combining what neural networks bring to really symbolic reasoning to understand how humans really understand the context, that there is gravity, there are certain things that we just are wired, and how can we teach AI systems that? And there is a lot of work that's happening in the neurosymbolic AI to bring these two things together. And I think that we'll probably see a lot of interesting results from that stream of work as well.
I think Gary Marcus would be very happy to hear that answer.
I was going to build on the comment about agents. And I think one of the things that will help unlock more sophisticated versions of agents is what we're calling large action models. And you hear about that a lot, but the better that the models can get about breaking down problems into component parts and so-called reasoning within the parts, I think that makes a big difference. I also loved, Don, what you were saying about sort of the sensory AI is becoming a bigger deal. I was gonna throw a curveball in this one also, because I'm an anthropologist and I think a lot about human AI interaction. And one of the fields that I've been intently watching is neuroscience, the neuroscience of people interacting with people. Okay, so there's been a lot of recent research that shows or begins to show, I don't want to overstate, that people in relationship and close relationships, like brainwaves start to synchronize, right? And I think there's a lot of incumbent research about what happens to people when they're interacting with AI. And how do we trust people versus trust AI? And that, I think, is really, really crucial to unlocking trustworthy, like the limits of AI, where we should put it, where we shouldn't put it. There's an endless amount of interesting stuff there.
That's really great to hear. Paula, I have a follow-up question for you then, from this anthropology perspective. My understanding is you wrote your PhD thesis about how unorthodox ideas go mainstream. We can definitely say we've seen that with AI overall, but with all the interest in agents, it sounds like we might see that process continue. What learnings can you share with us from the research that you've done about how these ideas go from science fiction to mainstream?
Well, it's interesting because my research was in a very different context. So my research was about how norms scale. So like how social movements that might be controversial become mainstream and stuff like that. And a lot of that really is to do with who we trust and who we look up to and sort of societal role models and stuff like that. So for example, I was tracing a number of movements that went from very obscure to sort of gradually more and more mainstream representation and ended up changing policy, right? So is that totally far afield of AI? I don't think so. Not particularly when you talk about AI in the workplace or adopting AI technology in ways that really change our day to day. I think a lot of it, and this is, I guess, why I have a job, comes down to trust. And it comes down to, do we trust a technology? Do we know what a technology is good for and not good for? Do we trust it to actually do what it says it's going to do? Which I will, when we talk about generative AI, is not a foregone conclusion, right? And so I think a lot of heard in the last panel, there was a question about regulation, lots of questions about guardrails. I think all of that is very much going to shape how far and how broad, and how AI has so much potential, but a crisis of trust could stop it in its tracks.
Don, I'm curious what you make of that. There's a lot of excitement around agents, and you flagged agents as well, but there are these questions around norms. As a user, what's it going to be like to deputize an agent to go off and take actions on your behalf? You're really on the front lines of the kind of applied ethics here. Have the norms caught up, or what needs to happen?
I think a lot of that really needs to be worked through. I think it's a sort of a live question, right? And I think that trust point is something that we're going to continue to be exploring. I mean, when you think about the possibilities of agents being able to take actions on your behalf, being able to sort of have that personalization element, and with personalization comes memorization, right? You're going to have things that can kind of wrap around you and really understand you and take things forward. You need to be thinking about the trust elements, how clear you are up front around, what these agents are capable of and what they're not. And I think the other aspect of that is always being clear as well that it is an agent. Because I think sometimes something that can sort of impact that trust is when there's confusion over, is this a human or is this an agent? And that can get a bit blurry sometimes in the way that the agents or even the LLMs can interact with you.
Follow up on that. I think I can cite some examples of one way in which we are dealing with it in an enterprise context. Obviously, when you open it up for broader domains, it gets a lot more complex. But in an enterprise context, you can build guardrails. So when you are, say, you're building, let's say, a chatbot, and the chatbot on HR benefits types of questions, HR would want to say that, yeah, you can answer questions on knowledge articles, but if somebody is asking, is John Doe on performance improvement plan? You don't want them to answer. So the chatbots to answer that question. So those kind of things or reveal any kind of personally identifiable information, gender, identities, race, and those kind of things. So we can build guardrails. So those kind of things, if we build guardrails, we can kind of control and keep them within the limits without going overboard with, making all sorts of assumptions. So I think that's one practical way in which this problem can be addressed, I would say.
That's great. I would love to hear more about guardrails. Are there particular kinds of guardrails that you find promising, or where in the pipeline for developing a system like this do guardrails make the most sense? Is it as early as pre-training and filtering the data that goes into that? Is it about building scaffolds and classifiers on top of your models to catch bad behavior?
Okay. I think it's got to be all of them, really. I think you have to look at it quite systematically and think about from pre-training to, the development and post-training as well. It's really important that it's thought about at all aspects or all points. I think the filters and classifiers, definitely, but they are generally sort of, on the sort of output level. So I think there will be, I think we need to continue to sort of consider how we can also improve those. I think guardrails can also, as we get into sort of newer modalities and newer spaces, they can be quite fragile and brittle, and they need to be made more robust. So there's a lot of work I think we will need to do on that over the coming years to just make sure that as new things come, as we're looking at agents, as we're looking at actions that they can take on your behalf, that we are really sort of testing every single guardrail that we're putting in place around them.
I would say there is also a life cycle to those guardrails, because what's a guardrail is today is based on a specific policy may not be something that needs to be applied, a month from now, a year from now. So over time, I think with whatever AI system we build, whatever guardrails it has, we have to continuously monitor it to make sure that we are applying the ones that are relevant and discarding the ones that are not. And if we are continuously applying certain types of guardrails, perhaps it's time to think about whether that really should be something that should be in the foundational model as a core principle itself, and therefore take that data and give enough data and train it as part of foundational models. Now, if you actually that happened in the industry, if you see the previous incarnations of large language models weren't so good at hallucination controlling themselves. And there was, many companies would release their models and then they would take it back because of some backlash on some things that happened, some incidents. And of course, then all these, companies that went back, companies and academics went back and trained all these models, the foundational models themselves, to be so good at, guarding themselves. So now the hallucination rate, if you look at some of the frontier, the big models, is quite less, the hallucination rate as compared to the models in the previous generation. So yeah, today's guardrails could become tomorrow's foundational model core principles over time as well.
I think most of us are talking in terms of the producers of the AI technology. I mean, the guardrails and how we need to be constantly updating the guardrails based on how things are evolving around. I think I get all of that, but I think we also should have like a consumer view of the agent. There are people who wants to use agent to increase efficiency in their lives, and there are people who are very paranoid about revealing so much about themselves, right? So I think it should be a two-way process where we should have a consumer perspective where the consumers actually will be consenting to if they want to use the agent or not. Like we have been using recommendation for the longest time, starting from Amazon shopping to Netflix movies. These are also basic agents. At the end of the day, we have been fine with that. But when they started doing more than just recommending the next clothes to buy or the next movie to watch, we started being careful. So I personally feel, but there are also enough people out there I know who are very happy with their lives getting automated. So it should be a two-way decision. People should also have a say in whether they want to be a user of the AI technology produced or not.
Yeah. Oh, did you? Because I could go on about guardrails for, I don't know, I could take the whole day. But I guess I was gonna say a couple of things. That's most exciting to me about the frontier of science on this right now. One is for agents, I think absolutely the most important thing. If you're a company and you're setting up a consumer-facing agent or an end-user-facing agent, you have to know that when you say your job, hey agent, your job is A and B, anything else, say no, escalate. You have to know that works, right? And I know I have a team at Salesforce that does adversarial testing, and we've been doing tons of adversarial testing on that right now. And there's a lot of, I think, scientific advancement around those guardrails, around more advanced forms of layered retrieval augmented generation, those types of things that will sort of bound what an AI system will respond to and what it will say no to. And that may sound really basic or quotidian, but it is like, that's the building block that's most essential. So I could go on and on, but that I think is really, really important to point out.
I enjoyed yesterday at Meta's developer conference. Mark Zuckerberg had an interaction with a deepfake influencer up on the screen, and he asked the influencer what they know about cattle ranching. And the influencer was very careful to say, I don't know anything about cattle ranching. That's not my job. And it did this exact kind of said no. It knew that was outside of its domain of expertise. I'm curious, some of these guardrails might have to be industry specific. So for example, we were talking about hallucination. There was a chief AI scientist at a company this morning telling me that their favorite way of dealing with hallucination is training their models on industry specific data, so it doesn't confuse terms across industries. What needs do different industries have for the guardrails that they put in place? And maybe I'll pose this first to Mahashweta, maybe about work at Visa or elsewhere.
And I work at Visa, that's a payments company, and the guardrails there are extremely strict. I mean, we have federal regulations that we cannot use any PII data anywhere for anything we do. So I think the solutions that we build, so you mentioned, like, do we have guardrails across all levels? Like, where do we start? For us, the entire pipeline has guardrails. We have to be highly compliant, starting from the way we are using the data, the way we are storing the data, what data can be connected to which other data set, to the model we are building, the privacy preserving techniques around it. It's okay if we lose a cent of like 1 or 2% of accuracy because of the guardrails. But at the end of the day, I think guardrails are the single most important factor, especially because of the domain we come from. Yeah. So I think even for the models we use, I think we are very sure that we need domain-specific model. Like there's a word called the chargeback. The chargeback in English dictionary and the chargeback from a visa perspective means very different things, because at visa, the phrase will be associated with several lines of details of what can be done, the ifs and if then else. So it's a huge set of rules and regulations that the large language models need to learn. So of course, I think we are very strong advocates for domain-specific models and also domain-specific guardrails, because the guardrails for English language cannot hold for payments data.
I would open that question up to.
I mean, I guess I would echo that. And I would say, I think there has been this mantra. It's almost a sort of bifurcated path of development. On the one hand, foundation models that are whatever, more data, right? And then domain specific models that, at least in our experience at Salesforce, tend to be more accurate, have a much lower carbon footprint as an added benefit, and are going to be much more trustworthy. So just to, for example, to see if you're trying to use an LLM for a highly regulated industry, let's say law, you probably don't want a general LLM. And so there's, I think now the need for, to that point, to be developing industry specific benchmarks for LLM performance, because that's what's going to matter. So we recently released a CRM specific benchmark. So customer relationship management specific benchmarks for LLMs. And it'll tell you, like, the one you can have an LLM that's performing beautifully for a consumer standpoint, and it might be very different in this standpoint. And I think that's the kind of specialization that we're going to need to see.
That's great. Any other thoughts on how different AIs need to be specialized to meet different industries, or how different industries need to change to be able to adopt AI more effectively?
I think, one of the things very early on, maybe around 10 years ago, when we were doing speech recognition for different industries, this became very prominent. And from my experience, I can say that having a very solid foundational model makes it easy to build the industry-specific model, because it has all the base understanding, whether it's a speech or multimodal, whatever that is, that the core foundations of the vocabulary, the language, and everything. So once you start with that, of course, yeah, for specific industries, doing industry-specific models might help. And I say might kind of cautiously, because it really depends on the use case and the industry, and you have to do the right kind of experiments and evaluation. And see whether that, because once you get into an industry-specific model or any kind of further fine-tuning on it, there is a whole life cycle to managing and maintaining it that comes with the domain and territory, and you are signing up for all of those things. You are somebody that you are the vendor that's giving that to you, and that's a non-trivial amount process. And while doing that, there are all kinds of challenges about alignment. These foundational models they're trained not only with large amounts of data. There's a lot of things that go on to align those models to whatever the human expectations are. That's how some of these ChatGPT models got really good, because what would a user expect in a human conversation, and they're very well aligned to that. Now, as you train industry-specific models and start to fine-tuning those models, if you don't pay careful attention to what techniques you use and how you are aligning those models, at some point they could drift away from the base foundations and may behave in unanticipated ways. So I think we are at an early stage in the industry in this. But I think what would really help is proper solid experiments, establishing the baselines on a good set of data sets, and evaluate the base model and evaluate the industry model, see if it actually is helping. And if it is helping, use it, but have a plan for the full continuous learning pipeline, the data flywheel, because it's having the first model and putting it in production is one thing, but then making sure that model stays relevant over a period of time by taking user feedback input and continuously stays relevant and improves. And if that cycle is not built, your excitement and all of that launch will go well. But after that, that model very soon, nobody will come back to use that application. So there are all these things that come with building any kind of fine-tuned or industry-specific model that one has to have proper tools and do evaluations for. That's what I would say we have to pay closer attention to before we jump to conclusion that, yeah, industry models are always better or fine-tuned models are always better.
I would just sort of say I agree with all of those points. I think in every industry, there is the need to, for any sort of industry application of this, you need to take something that is quite general purpose and make it relevant for that particular industry. Each industry will have its different rules, its regulations, its different policies. You need to check that those are being upheld in a way that a general purpose model will never sort of be able to understand. And obviously that depends on the groups that you're interacting with, whether it's legal, whether it's finance. All of those things will be really important. And I, massively agree on the importance of evaluations. They need to be run regularly, need to be checked to say that the model isn't changing, that something isn't degrading or getting unexpected results. So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and there's kind of a concerning possibility lurking behind these answers, that if having the best foundation model is crucial to succeed across different industries, you could end up with kind of a winner-takes-all dynamic in the market for AI models, where the company that builds the largest foundation model ends up having the most capable model. And then if on top of that alignment is fragile or delicate, then it can be difficult to steer those models in a way that is both useful and safe. So I would love to hear more thoughts about how do you democratize AI? How do you make sure that the promise of AI is available to small businesses, to individuals, and it also remains safe for those users?
I think having low code, no code kind of platforms, you're starting to see them in the industry, will go a long way in democratizing. What I mean by that is, a good chunk of use cases in many areas like finance, let's say marketing, HR, all of those areas could be, say, summarization or some kind of initial draft generation types of things. You don't need a whole lot of machinery for those kinds of use cases. If you provide a low code kind of a platform that allows somebody to say, here is a document or a set of documents I have some ability to ingest those documents, and here is the LLM model that I want to use, here is my prompt, and you're able to just simply set up that kind of a thing. Even somebody who cannot write a single line of code or does not even fully understand how the technology works behind the scenes, will be able to build actually a pipeline and be able to use it and get productive. So that's a great way for people in non-engineering types of business functions to get started. So building those kind of platforms and making it easy with all kinds of templates and examples for simpler use cases first in those platforms, and allow people to over time learn and share their expertise in terms of, hey, these are the best practices for prompts. This is what I found to be very useful. Everybody starts contributing to it. This is what my example for doing summarization on, IT incident tickets. This is my example on how to generate first draft for the marketing campaign. Others can start bouncing off of that. That's one. Another one I would say is more open data, open models, and open evaluations, and open source models. And I think that will go a long way to democratize it as well.
And I was gonna paint sort of the opposite picture as the one that you were painting, which is to say, there's a huge amount of value for companies, nonprofits, organizations of all stripes that that can be gleaned from generative AI. It doesn't have to be the latest, most advanced model, right? There's a huge amount of value in, for example, having help with a marketing campaign. Doesn't have to be the trillion-dollar model, right? And I think there's actually an increasing sense that the models themselves will become commodities, and that it's the systems that are built on top of it that help, as you were just saying, that sort of help any organization actually implement the technology and operationalize it at scale. That's going to make a big degree of difference. So one last thought on that. We've also been here before, right? We were here, someone in the last panel mentioned kind of the internet boom in the 90s, right? And then imagine at that point, it probably felt out of reach that a small mom and pop shop was going to have its own website. And now we don't think about that, right? So I'm pretty optimistic that these tools are going to become less and less expensive and more and more easy to use.
I think I will like to, I think I will follow up on what you said. I think we are talking a lot from the US perspective, but a lot of the small businesses today are actually outside the US. So I think a couple of things we should be prioritizing to democratize AI in the true sense of its term is to make it accessible to a wide range of people, whether it's with cost, with like lowering the prices, introducing different kind of languages, providing education, the AI literacy part, like telling them how to use it, creating designs that's inclusive. I think some of these things are probably not that important these days because we continue to look at from a US perspective, a first world nation perspective. But I think to truly democratize and make it accessible and used by the small businesses all over the world, where it can actually create like a significant delta. I believe this the design changes, accessibility, education, this is very important.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very optimistic about this, actually. I think there's a huge opportunity for small businesses to be able to use these for huge productivity gains. I think with open models, I think with some of the costs of those models coming down as well, I don't think you need the biggest and the best model to get those gains. And I think it comes down to, for a lot of small businesses, they're like working in niche areas with key sort of problems. They're seeing what the users actually need. And now they've got this like incredible power to help them do like, what were previously quite sort of annoying jobs, they can just sort of do quite quickly. So I'm really optimistic about the impact it will have.
That's great. I'm curious what advice each of you would give to women who are trying to break into this space and work on AI and innovate. I think we've given a really nice sketch of kind of what a lot of the AI landscape looks like right now. What advice would you give, especially the young women who are students in the audience? And let's go the opposite direction this time, so Dawn doesn't have to go first every time. Let's start with Paula.
I would say that the confidence to experiment, jump in, and really just get your feet wet is really there's not a better time than right now. And here's why. Because things are happening very quickly. There is a lot of excitement. There's also a lot of hype. And there are a lot of people out there confidently talking about things, which, might as well be you, right? That is to say, I think in this moment of time, there's a lot of questions that we don't have answers for. And there are a lot of people who are anointing themselves to give answers. It might as well be you giving answers.
I can't agree with you more. I can't think of a better time to actually be in the field of AI because the barrier to entry is so normalized, it's so low now. If when I was in college, I grew up in India and I was in doing engineering. We had a lab of some really the first generation computers, 5 of them the entire college has to use. And if you have to write a program, you wait in line, you started with assembly language and then doing Fortran, those kind of things. Imagine now all you have is open up ChatGPT and start typing your prompt in natural language. How can it be any easier than that, right? And if you can code a little bit, maybe make an API call. So yeah, I think just be bold, confident, and I think this is a time, the best time to get into. The barrier is so low, and the low code, no code platforms make it even more easier.
I have a little bit of a different suggestion. I will say pursue a career in PhD only if you are passionate about it. Don't go for it just because there's a lot of hype around it. Yeah, so there's a lot of noise. So let's try to filter the noise out and try to focus on what's important. So I think it's important to choose an area that you are passionate about.
I would say that the message around now is the time is so right. I think every month that passes by, there's so much change. Like there's so much that we learn every month. So I feel like this is the perfect time. And it's a perfect time to learn as much as you can about the space. And that information is there, right? It's flowing. It's in research papers. It's readily available through so many different sort of ways. So I would sort of really encourage you to kind of learn as much as you can, engage in it as much as you can. And I think you'll find that opportunities will just open up.
Is that a good place for us
We
to
have
end?
actually time for maybe one question. Oh, wow, look at this. Take one.
I saw you first.
Wow.
Hi, thank you so much for coming from really the really prestigious companies and presenting yourself and their position to all of us. So I'm going to ask a really different type of question. So the reality is that if you go to the average person, I'm going to take the US for example, and talk about AI, they don't like AI because honestly, we have talked about all the great things that AI could do, such as like the weather forecasting that Amina showed us. But the reality is in 5 years, it's going to change the landscape of employment. It honestly seems to be benefiting like the top 5% or even a smaller percentage of Americans. And like we see a lot of these companies and we see that our data is being sold. We're not being paid for the data that's being used for these models. What is the sustainability aspect of running these models? Like you're here representing your companies, but why should we trust you and with our data? And we talked a lot about trustworthiness of the models and systems. But if you pull back the curtain, who is really pulling the strings? It's your larger organizations. So why should we trust you with technology that could potentially take away our jobs?
So the challenge is to answer that in 3 minutes.
I love the question. And I think these are really important questions to ask. So a couple of thoughts. One, I don't think anyone should give their trust to any organization. I think trust is earned, right? And we did a lot of studies about, for example, marketing and companies' relationships with consumers. And time again, we found that no surprise, people give more data willingly, share more data with companies that they trust who give them value for the data, right? There is a virtuous loop, and we try to build that into the technology, into marketing technology, and so on. Similarly, and I think the question, it's interesting, like the moment that I knew that this last wave of AI was capturing people's attention was because I started getting calls from lots of people, friends who knew I was been working in an AI for a long time, but who all of a sudden were like, oh, is this going to change my job? I think the truth is we don't know yet, right? We actually don't know how this is going to play out. And we don't know, I mean, oftentimes these transitions take a really, really long time to play out. My conviction and my passion is that the way that this will best play out is when we center people in the technology, that we have that the workforce that is building the technology is representative of the public that it serves, that when we are creating technology, we're creating it with principles in mind that, for example, I think you mentioned this, like if you're interacting with an agent, you know you're interacting with an AI agent. You're not being fooled that you're interacting with with AI and so on. I think all of that's really important. And also it's not enough. And that we need the government involved as well. Like we need regulation, and we need regulation not just in terms of frontier AI, we need regulation in terms of high risk AI that's being used to determine who gets a job or who gets a loan and so on. And we do need to look at what are the skills of the future and how do we make sure that this transition that we don't know what it's going to look like, but we know that we know that it needs to be equitable. So I think you're asking all the right questions. That's what I would say.
I think we are unfortunately out of time. The question is awesome.
Yeah.
But I would like to make two observations before we go into the break. The first one is, if anybody's listening to this recording, and everybody in this room who is organizing conferences around AI and technology, listening to every session today and the depth and the value of the sharing of these experts, there should be no reason on the planet to have any conference with at least a 50-50 mix between male and female. So that's number one. Number two is earlier in the year and around May timeframe, I was traveling to Europe to speak at multiple conferences, and I teamed up with what I call now a friend of mine, and he's actually on Vanessa's team at Stanford High, the Human Center for Artificial Intelligence. And he's a researcher and editor of the AI Index Report. And if any of you have not, and is interested in AI, who wants to get a 360 view of what's going on right now on any aspect in AI, I can highly recommend download for free the annual AI Index Report, edited and written and published by Stanford High. And Vanessa, thank you very much for being here. And the reason why I'm pointing that out, Nestor always had this one technical slide that he loves. I have one slide that I like, and I think, Paula, you mentioned it earlier in a second ago, and that is, there's one danger, or multiple ones, but there's one particular one that I picked up on it in this report. There's a slide in there with many, many countries around the world where you researched the concern and trustworthiness that people have currently since the moment ChatGPT was launched. And there's this table with percentages. And the biggest takeaway from me was every single country in the world listed on that tab, and you probably know more the details than I do, every single country, without any exception, people are concerned about the trustworthiness of AI. And the takeaway from me on that slide is, if the big corporations and research is not addressing the trustworthiness of the AI in general, and I think you stated it before, this whole thing can backfire and can actually fall apart. So that's why this question was actually brilliant. So thank you very much. I would love to thank the entire panel here. Rocket, thank you very much. We have Dawn, Paula, Rama, and Mahashweta. Thank you. And for now, I would say